So hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm really happy to see you all here. Today I have a special guest on my channel, Tori H. We did a video
Hi.
together a few months ago on my channel and a couple of other videos on Tori's channel. So thank you, Tori, for joining me. If you want to say a little bit about yourself and what your channel is about.
Right. I have a channel that focuses on psychology, particularly in MBTI, sometimes also anagram types, and a little bit on socionics as well. And I also have some social commentary stuff going on and some like book reviews that is more like on the side. So the main part of my channel is still based on psychology and Jungian types.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really liked all of our videos so far. We've talked
Yeah.
about the cognitive functions in INFJs before. And recently, last week, we made a video on Tori's channel about narcissism and how some personality types like INFJs might struggle in relating to and having various different dynamics with such people. And today we thought we are going to continue this series of talks and explore the attachment styles, namely anxious, avoidant, secure, and disorganized attachment styles, how we can use these things to learn more about ourselves. And we will even draw a little bit of a connection with potential MBTI, let's say, characteristics here and there. So tune in for that. We
Mhm.
will be discussing about that in the next maybe 20-30 minutes or so. Um,
Right.
so yeah, Tori, what is your opinion on these attachment styles and how do you think they can teach people to understand themselves and their relationships better?
Right. So I have read that apparently your attachment style kind of impacts how your relationships are. So it impacts like what kind of people you're attracted to, and also the type of people that you tend to draw into your life. So I would say, generally speaking, if you are someone who is secure in your attachment, you tend to be drawing in people who are also securely attached, even though, sometimes may not be the case, but generally I would say that it tends to be that way.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, though, if you are anxious, you tend to be more attracted to avoidant partners, which is a very um, like not a great match because eventually it will not last. Usually it will be quite a short lasting relationship dynamic. And if you are a disorganized style, meaning that you have both the traits of the anxious and the avoidant, you tend to draw in people who are both anxious and avoidant. So
Mhm.
it's not a healthy dynamic either, because I personally think that the goal is really to move to a secure
Mhm.
attachment, because that's really when you can feel the most fulfilled in your
Mhm.
relationships,
Mhm.
and both sides are actually able to um, not overreact to situations or create situations that like a lot of drama in the relationship. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think these kind of patterns that you were mentioning, that some attachment styles might attract other attachment styles, are very, very obvious and they happen quite a lot in our lives. And just
Yes.
to give you guys like a background for those of you who are not very familiar with what these attachment styles mean, they basically reflect the way that we relate to other people, but also to the world in general. Like, generally speaking, they are most obvious in romantic relationships because that's usually where we are the most vulnerable. But they also come across with like friends or family, or even like how we relate to other things in our lives, like a job or any project or whatever. Okay. So basically, every single human being has a little bit of all of these attachment styles, but it tends to be the case that one of them is stronger. We have secure attachment, which means that we are comfortable being close to someone, having a relationship, having this healthy level of codependency. But at the same time, we're also comfortable with being alone. We don't get very stressed or scared if we are not in a relationship, and we're not desperate to be in a relationship, and we can keep our distance when is needed, and so on. And this is the ideal, right? But then, of course, people go through different things in their lives, and this can shift their attachment style. So we've got on the one hand the avoidant style, which I've noticed tends to be quite common among MBTI types that are introverted and thinkers. Not only, but it tends to be like a higher proportion there. And avoidant types are more likely to feel uncomfortable with this close intimacy. They might feel like they need more space, that they get easily suffocated in a relationship, and they are afraid that they will lose their independence, okay? And then on the other side of the spectrum, we've got anxious attachment, which means that we are more likely to cling on to other people and to feel uncomfortable when we are alone or when we don't have this close intimacy with someone. And rather than just having this healthy codependency level, we tend to go into the other extreme and be very depending on the other person. And this tends to be, in my observation at least, a little bit more common with extroverted and feeling types. Not always, as I said, but it's more frequent there. And as Tori mentioned earlier, there's another style, fearful of avoidant or disorganized, depending on how we look at it. This is an attachment style that combines anxious and avoidant, and they're pretty much at the same level. And the person tends to go from one extreme to the other to kind of get this dynamic in within themselves and within the relationship with other people. So that's a general idea. Tori, do you feel like exploring one of these styles in particular?
Right. So I think the avoidant style is it can be common among the I and T types, as well as generally I think it's more of, types that are not very emotional. I mean, that's what I observe, like especially types that, tend to have the feeling function as towards their last function. Because I know of quite a number of, I think it might be ITJs and EXTJs who have that avoidant tendency. And what I tend to observe is that they often just try to avoid they try to avoid having, maybe not the IXTJ because they still want the stability in their life, but it's more of, I think I said maybe not the ISTJs, but like it's more of the maybe more of the ENTJ, the INTJ, as well as sometimes the ENTP. And obviously depending on the individual as well, they can have this like a bit more, they can be a little bit more like unable to want to stay in one relationship. So I think I had like quite a number of observations from my friends who were dating some of these types, and they tend to prefer like a more casual dating style. And once one person seems to be a little bit more invested, they tend to back away from it. So it's like, for example, it could be like a very small thing. Like sometimes they will like overreact. Like it could be like, oh, this person wants to have maybe like see them a little more often, or ask for a little more in a relationship, like maybe ask to plan for the date or something. And the avoidance style tends to be very terrified at like any hints of wanting to move the relationship forward, even if it is not even an actual move forward. It might be just a like suggestion. There was one time I think someone suggested having a Zoom call, and I thought it was reasonable because it was kind of post-COVID. And that guy was like freaking out and thought that she wanted something more serious, because she wanted like more frequent Zoom calls. But I mean, to a normal person, it could just be that it was post-COVID, and so wanting to have more connection with people. But the avoidant type interpreted it as something that is like very scary, like trying to move the relationship forward too
Yeah.
quickly. So I think they can overread signs and back away at signs of possible increase in intimacy levels
Yeah.
beyond like the casual level.
Mm.
Um,
Definitely, I can see
yeah,
that because, uh, as by the definition of the avoidant attachment style, people who prefer this attachment style or who have high characteristics that resemble this style tend to feel very uncomfortable with the idea of having other people set some sort of a boundary to them, because they are very sensitive to when other people come into their lives and suggest doing various things together. It might be that the other person is actually trying to limit them. And in that case, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of people would react negatively to that. But in some other situations, as you said, the other person, maybe someone with an anxious attachment style or a secure attachment style, they won't necessarily try to limit the person with the avoidant attachment style, but they will feel that that's the case, and they will feel very concerned and panicked and anxious about the idea that someone else will try to control them. And that's why they will feel the need to kind of back off and take some time for themselves, to kind of recharge and convince themselves again that they are independent, they are safe, that no one is going to take control over their identity or anything that is very important to them. So definitely that's the case. And I think if we kind of reverse the mirror and we look at the anxious attachment style, deep down, a very similar process occurs. This fear, right? Fear of having their needs kind of not met, maybe, but in a different way. So for the anxious person, a pretty different process will occur, after all, in their behavior at least, that they will start panicking when the other person is going away. So usually a lot of people who have an anxious attachment style end up in a relationship with a person with an avoidant attachment style. So they kind of trigger each other. And the person
yeah,
who has the anxious attachment style will feel very bad that the avoidant person keeps trying to put a little bit of space there, or to like move away, or to be independent, do things alone. And the person with the anxious attachment style will start worrying a lot and panicking a lot, and will start trying to take control over the relationship and make sure that the other person is not going to leave them. Have you noticed this in these relationships that you were mentioning earlier?
yeah. And moving to the MBTI a little bit, I
Yeah.
find it really funny because I'm like a member of the ESTP group, and I keep seeing like NF types like um basically making posts about their ESTP partner, and a lot of times it's not even a boyfriend yet. It might be a date or someone they knew, and it's just like the dynamic of the avoidant and the anxious, in my opinion, because I mean the guy may not be avoidant, but the girl is clearly anxious in that
Mhm.
situation, because it was like a lot of posts were about like, oh, I'm wondering why is he not replying, or
Yeah.
like I'm really worried about where I stand in this relationship. And it's like the ESTP is the one with the lower development, in as in they don't have a very strong feeling function, whereas the NF type obviously has like a stronger emotions in terms of their priority. And so you can see that dynamic play out very frequently. And I think sometimes though they might just not be. I think anxious can be attracted to both secure and avoidant.
Mhm.
The secure type may just not be interested because they find them too anxious. So they might move away because of that reason as well. But avoidant type, what I tend to notice is that the avoidant and anxious, they are attracted to each other initially, but it tends to be usually it ends up being the anxious
Toxic.
chasing the avoidance.
Mm.
And so I'm not sure if they are like actually going to be in a relationship, because the avoidant may be like half in but not really.
Yeah.
So the avoidant may still be talking to other people and so on, and kind of not sure about it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the anxious is like usually trying to convince the avoidant that they should be in a more serious or more committed
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely the dynamic usually between avoidant and anxious. The avoidant attachment style doesn't really feel comfortable with committing, especially if the proportion of avoidance is very high. I have a friend, she's a therapist and she specializes in attachment styles, and she used a really cool metaphor. She says, there's a pizza in every single human being. Some slices are avoidant, some slices are anxious, and some slices are secure, and the proportion or percentage of those slices depends on the human. And in the case of you having many slices that are avoidant and far less that are secure or anxious, you are very likely to feel extremely uncomfortable committing to a long-term relationship. And yes, I've noticed this is more common among thinker types or introverted types, and especially ITs, so ISTPs, INTPs, INTJs, ISTJs. Again, it's not a rule, everyone can have any attachment style, but this seems to be more frequent because they tend to be focused more on their own independence, right? Whereas when it comes to the anxious types, especially if their pizza is very much focused on this anxious attachment style, this means that they will feel extremely uncomfortable with this loneliness or independence or single life, and they will be desperately searching for a relationship. I've noticed that a lot of people with really high anxious attachment traits, they tend to jump from one relationship to the other, especially when they're young and they're not really aware yet of these internal processes. And they never leave space in between those relationships to heal, to take their time to think about what went wrong, and to kind of select their partners better in the future. And as you said, Tori, because they often end up with avoidant attachment style individuals, they feel even more hurt that those people don't give them what they need. So they deepen this fear that they're not worthy of being loved, or that they don't deserve a good relationship, and they keep going to the next, stuck in this vortex and at not having time for themselves to process things. And unfortunately, this can hurt them quite a lot in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think going off that as well, like I want to make a little bit of a distinction, because I think there's a confusion when people type, I guess not type, but like assign an attachment style to people. Like sometimes they assume, oh, this person is not responding to me, he must be avoidant.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a difference between avoidant and not being interested in someone.
Exactly.
So I feel like in some cases, I think the way to tell, this is my own understanding. So the way to tell if someone is an avoidant, or if someone is just secure but not, maybe not like interested in a relationship at the moment, or might not be interested in that person in particular, it's to look at their long-term history.
Yeah.
So avoidant is more likely to just like not want a relationship, like not have a long-term relationship, maybe even like way beyond their 30s and 40s. I mean, there are people like that, literally they just don't want to be married, or they're like
Yeah.
scared of commitment. But someone who is maybe not looking for a relationship but open to a relationship with the right person could be like, there are certain personalities that are a little more like fun loving when they're
Yeah.
younger, like the ESTPs and ESFPs. But what I notice is that some of them, as they get older, they actually want to find someone
Yeah.
and be in a marriage. So those people are not avoidant. They just want to have fun at a
Yeah.
younger age.
Yeah. And that's
So when
actually
they get
secure. Yeah.
yeah, so when they get older, they're like, okay, so now I'm like already experienced what I wanted to, and I would like to,
Hmm.
be more serious in my relationships. And so they actually do find a partner and settle down. So I think that's how you tell. It's like the trend, and why they choose to do the things they do.
Hmm.
And avoidant tends to be a lot more shaky.
Hmm.
Like the way that they approach relationships is like
Hmm.
they kind of sometimes they try to date around, and then when they could actually show interest in the beginning, but then once someone else shows interest, they can like not want to be in it anymore. So I think that's more of an avoidant type
Yeah,
of person.
definitely. Even in professional diagnosis of attachment styles, one of the descriptions or one of the characteristics of the avoidant attachment is that they miss their partner when the partner is not around, but as soon as they get together with the partner, they feel the need to escape, as if, of course they want intimacy and they want connection, because most people do, and they do long for that, but they feel uncomfortable if that feeling of intimacy and connectedness increases or takes longer, and they need more breaks in between. On the other hand, we've got the anxious attachment that doesn't really want to have breaks at all. They want to be in a continuous state of connection. Whereas the secure one comes in the middle and it's like, yes, I want this connection. I'm really happy about it. And I can spend quite a lot of time with you. But then, of course, I will also respect that both of us have boundaries and we both need our alone time and so on and so forth. But yeah, you said something that I want to go back to. You said something that people sometimes say that someone has an avoidance style just because they don't reply to their messages or their calls or whatever. And this is, yeah, one of the reasons could be, of course, they're not interested, but also sometimes even someone who has a secure attachment style, if they are in a relationship or not in a relationship, but like talking to or dating someone who is anxious, for instance, the secure person might move towards avoidance, because when someone is anxious or extremely anxious towards us, it might trigger this avoidance. It's natural if you think about your previous relationships or work or anything. When people cling on to us too hard, we feel the need to go away. And the opposite happens with someone who always avoids us. Even as a secure attachment style individual, if you are in a relationship with someone who's very avoidant, you might feel like you get a little bit anxious and you need a little bit more affirmation from the other person. And something funny I've noticed is that even if two people with an avoidant attachment style get together, this can also happen. Like there's two possibilities. One of them is they live their separate lives. They're like two parallel lines that never meet. It's as if they're not even in a relationship, or they trigger each other and one of them acts very avoidant, the other one becomes a little bit anxious. Then the other one starts pulling away and the second one becomes a little bit anxious. And it's this really interesting dynamic. Again, depending on their internal pizzas and how much of a percentage of each of these attachment styles they have.
Right. And also if the two anxious get together, one of them may be a bit avoidant.
Exactly.
Because like I feel like in general, anxious don't seem to be very attracted to other anxious types. And avoidance don't seem to avoidance and avoidance generally do not seem to be together because they just don't, neither of them is trying.
Yeah. So. It's because of this general belief that society tends to have. And if you look at all of the like pop culture songs, they all talk about this really dramatic love, right? This roller coaster of a love that you find in movies and TV shows, often the most stereotypical ones. And people value this idea that love should be dramatic and intense and filled with a lot of obstacles that you then overcome. That's exactly the description of an anxious and avoidant person being together. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah, okay. Oh my god, that's one show that shows that like so obviously. It's the Sex and the City.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Carrie and Mr. Big.
Important show.
Yeah. I think Carrie is an ENFP and Mr. Big is an ISTP. That's my opinion.
Yeah, which is a very strange match. And Mr. Wait, was it Mr. Big? Yeah, he is so avoidant, and Carrie is so anxious. Oh my god, the two of them is just really bad, actually.
And you can see how toxic their relationship is throughout the years, because when Carrie becomes very anxious and she moves towards him and tries to like spend more time to him and commit and make future plans, he gets panicked and he distances himself.
And after a while,
and after a while of him being so like avoidant, she's like, oh, I'm tired of this, I don't want to do this anymore, so she leaves. And that's when he starts calling her again, because the avoidant is also looking for that drama deep inside. They might not be aware of it, but they start like calling the other person or trying to spend more time with them, and then the anxious is like, oh, they're interested again. So the whole thing starts again, and the anxious starts getting possessive or clingy, the avoidant moves away, and it's like back and forth like this all the time. Yeah, that was a very good example.
Yeah, and I remember there was a scene that was a very classic example. He said he was like, oh, I'm gonna be in, I think in Paris or something for a
Yeah.
business trip. It might be a few years. And like, oh, so you're not gonna like factor me in this like future? And he's like, oh,
Mhm.
why? As in, it's like to a normal securely attached person. I mean, factoring someone in your future, um, is
It's
pretty normal
natural.
in a
Yeah.
relationship. But he like overreacted. He's like, oh, why do I need to do this? And then she like panicked, obviously,
Mm.
because it's very triggering. And then they started like throwing fast food at each other. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
right, I remember. Yes.
yeah, it was so bad, the relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for Mr. Big, you can see both the avoidant attachment style, but also the ISTP personality, because not only is he avoidant, but he also has child NI or low NI, and he feels uncomfortable with planning for the future. And this applies even more because of the avoidant attachment style. It makes this stand out even more, this reluctance to think about the future, especially when he needs to include his partner into that future. Whereas Carrie is the opposite. Being an intuitive, she likes planning for the future. And being an anxious attachment style makes her even more obsessed with planning, her marriage or her life with him long term. Or like if we think about the characters, Charlotte is also clearly anxiously attached, whereas Samantha is obviously avoidant.
Yeah, that's why she avoids relationships like for her whole life, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. The thing is some people say avoidance seem pretty happy on their own. But I think it depends on where their freedom is coming from. Like
Yeah.
some avoidance have this secret like desire for intimacy, but they just don't trust enough. So they're like, I would rather not.
Yeah.
Like they would rather take the easy route. So it's easier, it's more like what they're familiar with.
Exactly. I feel like it's kind of like, let's imagine that this is a baseline. Um, the avoidant attachment style is alone, and they are at their baseline. They're comfortable with that loneliness. When they get into a healthy relationship, though, the happiness will increase, obviously. Um, and they feel like, yes, they would like that, of course, because everyone wants that, but they are afraid that they will not be able to have it, and they are afraid of being in a toxic relationship, which will take them lower, at a lower level as compared to their loneliness, right? Whereas for someone who has an anxious attachment style, they're more likely to think that any relationship is better than being alone, even toxic ones. That's why they are so desperate to find another partner to be with, and they are completely stressed at the idea that their relationships will fail. And fear of abandonment is also very characteristic of an anxious attachment style, a strong fear of abandonment or rejection even. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like so like I have a more disorganized
Mm-hmm.
attachment style, and it's hard to explain, but it's kind of like a mix of both.
Yeah.
Like I don't see myself as anxious, as in my actions are usually not the anxious attachment style, because I don't feel the need to be in a relationship with people, and sometimes that can make me seem like an avoidant
Mm-hmm.
because I can avoid relationships sometimes as well because of the fear of like being with the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I also have the anxious traits. So I'm not like fully an avoidant because
Mm-hmm.
someone who is fully avoidant seems to not care about relationships at all, in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's like only when someone tries to, get them into one, and
Yeah,
then they will be like, okay, I'll consider.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, the disorganized attachment is like debated a lot because in the original theory, I don't think it was there. And then later, some more theorists came and discussed, and there's still some debate in the psychological community with respect to, okay, is it just that you have a more balanced combination of the attachment styles, or is it an attachment style on its own? But generally, I would say that people who prefer this attachment style, they tend to have this push and pull behavior. Like
Yep.
they want to connect and they draw the people in, but then they start panicking and they push them away, and it's like back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know a friend who has the same attachment style, and
Okay.
she's like telling me how the guys are always confused by her. And
Okay.
like one guy literally said, like, why are you so hard to figure out? Because she's obviously not avoidant completely, but she's also like not anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she does a lot of the push and pull thing, which they're like, so is she interested or not? Like, just
Yeah.
cannot tell.
Yeah. She might be disorganized. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, going back to our original question, like, why is this useful? Well, it's useful because it helps us understand why we fear certain things in relationships, why other people might also fear things. And we can acknowledge that nobody's perfect. Everyone has some of their insecurities in the way they get attached to other people. And I think that understanding these things actually helps becoming more tolerant and empathetic with respect to each other, and just giving each other space to grow, basically. And you mentioned at the beginning that the goal is to move towards secure. The theory says that you cannot fully change your attachment style, but you can adopt more secure traits, especially if you are in relationships with people who have a secure attachment style. And if you work on yourself, like therapy, coaching, and just simply introspection can help a lot. So yeah, thank you very much for being on my channel again, Tori. I always like our conversations on camera or not.
Yeah.
um, I will link your YouTube channel and your Instagram page in the description below. So you guys feel free to check Tori's content out. She has really interesting conversations with a lot of other YouTubers as well. I feel like your channel also brings in a lot of different perspectives from other YouTubers as well. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you again for everything.